For this assignment, I saw it as an opportunity to better my literary skills with the writing of a news story. After learning more about structuring a news story in week 3 using the pyramid technique, I began writing my own news stories just to gain some confidence. I also printed out news articles and highlighted the 6 W's, and I analysed how different newspapers structured their articles. I then began on my news story idea. I got into contact with a local performing arts group after researching that, according to the Stage Ticket Survey of 2022, the cost of theatre tickets had increased by up to 20%. And I conducted an interview with the publicist and the chairman of the group. And although I actually had quite a lot of questions written down, the conversation ended up flowing really well and I gained a lot of information. I then began drafting up my story. I gathered key quotes from my interview which supported my statements made, and after getting some feedback from my lecturer, I changed around a few parts of my article, with the key information being at the top. So for my nibs, I actually initially intended to go around the centre of Coventry, similar to what we did in week 2 of our learning, and find some local news stories and maybe news stories in the university as well to create my nibs. However, I actually ended up finding a lot of stories on my Facebook's local community chat. So these included charity events, store openings, and just general activities going on in my local area. However, one problem I faced was that a lot of these posts lacked key information, whether it was opening dates or the actual specific location of the event. And this kind of just showed the downside of using social media over word of mouth for information gathering. And therefore I went out into my village and talked to a lot of the locals to see if they knew any more on the events happening, and they did, and they were happy to give me the information. So I continued to write my nibs based on the information I'd gathered. Next time, for writing my news in briefs, I would definitely use a mix of social media and word of mouth for my news gathering. As previously stated, there was gaps with the information provided on Facebook. So next up was my social media campaign, and I really wanted to focus on branding and products and creating a social media presence for a brand, making it more media comms than journalism. So I began contacting a brand whose store I had visited before, and although they had a good atmosphere physically, on their social media they didn't really have much of a presence. So I sent an email over to the owner, and he replied fairly quickly and positively after I explained my campaign idea about kind of pushing more of the vintage clothes and showing off the skateboards that he had to offer. I went over for an initial meeting where I kind of gathered what he wanted to gain from the campaign, as well as pitching some house theme ideas and colour schemes and video ideas for TikTok. And after I gathered this information, I began working on my plan. So we set up a date and a time for the shoot day. I went onto TikTok, saw what was trending and what maybe other brands that were similar were doing to hit the target audiences. So I got out the Canon 700D and the Sony Z90, and I went over and shot some footage. So the shoot definitely went well. I gained a lot of content, especially photos that would be coherent in an Instagram grid, as well as some short clips to produce an advert, as well as some portrait shots for TikTok. And I spent time editing the images on Photoshop just to enhance the colour. I actually found that the TikToks ended up being the easiest to produce, as they already have a section for trending sounds and hashtags. One area I would change for the campaign is the advert. I think I would have liked to get a few more action shots of the skateboards being used to give a bit more variety to the footage. So for my poster, I decided to focus on violence against women and girls. I began to read into the Spotlight Initiative and what they do. I looked on their social media such as Instagram, and I found that they were more pushing to educate people on the topic of violence through the use of visual aids and statistics, and I wanted to portray this in my poster. Therefore, I created visual statistics such as pie charts to grab the reader's attention. I read multiple articles such as 1 in 3 women globally experience violence by the World Health Organization site. I also used the campaign's colours of black, white and red with a punchy title of Women Deserve Safety. I struggled to narrow down what the key information actually was, and therefore I looked at other UN campaign posters for inspiration on my structure. So finally was my contact sheet and the email threads. So as I've progressed through the different modules, I've contacted charities, professionals and store owners. At first, I wasn't quite sure how to structure a professional email. However, after being shown an example by my lecturer, I began writing to professionals, asking to collaborate or conduct interviews with them. I was friendly yet straight to the point, and I think this is why I gained so many positive responses. This allowed me to grow my contacts and feel confident that my relationship with them will continue throughout my career. Overall, there were areas in the artefacts that I found challenging. However, I overcame these by researching, practicing and asking for advice, not only from my lecturers but also my peers. And I've definitely learnt the ways in which social media should be navigated when working with companies, as well as news gathering and the pros and cons of using social media for news gathering. And I have definitely become more confident in my professionalism in the media field.